Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Rough Riders, where every week we talk writing, self-publishing, and making it as an author. This week, I am joined by another author, another indie author named H.D. Sear, or at least that's what she writes under. I know her as Heather. So, hi, Heather. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good. So I know you write in the dark urban fantasy kind of genre. So I actually only just learned what urban fantasy was about a week or two ago when I interviewed my first urban fantasy author. So I've made it pretty evident at this point that fantasy is not really a genre that I know a ton about. I've said in other videos, so people are going to get sick of me saying this, but my exposure to fantasy is largely limited to like Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings. So now that I'm learning that there's so many subgenres of it, it's pretty cool to me because I feel like it's a learning experience every time I talk to someone new. So it's pretty cool. So I guess we'll just start with where we've been starting with everyone so far. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, what's your background?
Okay. So I teach. I teach college. I teach history and history. I used to teach women's studies, but I
Mm-hmm.
stopped doing that. I'm only teaching history now. My writing
Oh,
background is not it's
yeah.
not extensive, although I have been writing since I was in like the fourth grade.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so I guess my background is I've always loved writing, and
Mm-hmm.
I went to school for writing, and I ended up getting a degree in history and then women's studies.
Okay.
So yeah.
Cool. Well, my mom's a teacher, so
Hey.
I have a lot of respect for people who actually go into education because I can't imagine that it's easy all the time. It's also probably really hard, or at least I'm imagining that. Do you have issues now with students using like AI and stuff
Oh
to
yeah.
generate things? Like that's something I
Yes.
never really had to think about when I was in college because it didn't exist yet.
Yeah, it's
But
very obvious when a student who has struggled with writing, all of a sudden they hand in this paper that is better than my graduate paper. So
hmm,
it's kind of obvious. Yeah, but not
yeah,
a fortunately most students don't do that.
good.
So yeah, yeah.
Good. Well, I'm glad. So,
Yeah.
um, so I mean, and you with a background, or at least your education in writing and all of that, I would imagine it's a little bit easier for you to spot something that is a little bit off with
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
student whose writing suddenly improves dramatically and starts, they're suddenly kind of eloquent about things when they wouldn't have been before. So, but with your own writing, so your background or your education is in that, and then you went into history though. But I was reading through your author bio and just trying to get an idea of kind of who you were before we started all of this, the interview process and all of that. And I saw that you have an interest in criminology and psychology specifically, which is really cool because when I see someone as a fantasy author, I'm not necessarily thinking that that's the direction that it's going to go. So I saw that your books, you've got two of them out right now, that those have sort of a criminal element to them, which is very interesting to me. So actually, could you tell me a little bit about what gets you into urban fantasy? Like what about that subgenre of fantasy is the thing that really gets you interested? Like what draws you to that kind of fantasy?
Um, so okay. It's a very long story that I will make only 1 or 2 minutes long. But basically, I used to love just like my husband. I'm looking at a bookcase right now. It's just full of fantasy that it was my husband's from like 20 or 30 years ago. And when we started dating, I would read like R.A. Salvatore, Robert Jordan, all that stuff. And then about 10 or 15 years ago, a friend of mine introduced me to Patricia Briggs, who writes the Mercy Thompson and then the Alpha Omega series.
Mhm.
I instantly fell in love. And there is just something about being in our world and having these supernatural creatures around us. So Patricia Briggs, in her books, some of these supernatural creatures, the fae and the werewolves, they're out. But some of the other ones are not. But I've read other books where people are not aware that there are such things as vampires and werewolves and stuff like that. So there's just something about making this world more magical that just sort of draws me to it. Also, I tried writing fantasy, and for those who write fantasy, I'm giving you major kudos, because world building is no joke. That is incredibly difficult to do. I tried to do it. I didn't like it. So I thought, why don't I just try writing urban fantasy? And that was so much easier for me. So
Mhm.
much easier. So did that answer the question?
Yeah,
When I
absolutely.
start talking,
No,
like,
well, that definitely is a thing with fantasy and sci-fi. Like, so I write primarily sci-fi, not all of it is, but most of it is. And it's so similar to fantasy in so many ways, in that
mm,
you really do, with a lot of kinds of sci-fi and just like a lot of kinds of fantasy, you have to do like what you just said. You have to do a lot of world building. So you really are a lot of the time just starting from scratch.
mhm,
And, you don't always have to go super grand scale. I just have a tendency to do that. And I end up making up so much background information and taking so much time to do that, which for me is fun. And I think a lot of people who do it think it's fun. But the
mm,
problem with it is that you can sometimes go a little bit overboard, and then you do way more than you need to. So, and it's always a temptation when you're writing in a subgenre of fantasy or sci-fi where you do have to do that kind of world building. You can very easily turn it into a way to procrastinate,
yeah,
where you just, instead of actually writing your novel or your short stories or whatever you're writing, you just end up spending hours and hours on background information that you're never even going to need to use at any point. So don't be too don't be too impressed with the world building thing, because a lot of the time it's just a way to procrastinate, and it's just an excuse. So that's all it is. But
yeah,
I think it's good as an author to know kind of what your fortes are. And I think that you being aware that world building, maybe, or like super big world building, maybe just isn't really I don't want to say it's not your thing, but it's just not really in your nature to go that way. Then it's good to just sort of know what your limits are, what your comfort
yeah,
zone is, and then just stick to writing in that, because you're going to do way better when you're writing in something that you're comfortable with, as opposed to just going out of your way to do all this extra stuff just for the sake of being like, oh, this is what you do in fantasy, this is what you do in sci-fi. So I commend you a lot for kind of knowing where your comfort zone is with that. So urban fantasy, from what I understand, is definitely, it's a little bit more, a little bit smaller scale, which is
mm.
great. And then, do you write in like real world places, or are like the settings of your novel maybe a little, they're set in like maybe a real state, but it's not an actual town, it's a fictional town in a real state? Or so where do you set your novels?
So my first novel takes place in Connecticut, and my Sam and her roommate live in Manchester, which is where I grew up. So
Mm-hmm.
I incorporate real places, and I talk about real places in Manchester. But I also, if I'm going to talk about, like, one of the places that they hang out at is a biker bar, and I don't know of any biker bars in Manchester. So I
Mm-hmm.
made up my own, which is set in front of the Cheney Mills apartments.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cheney Mills apartment is a real place. The biker bar is not. But I do have a place in New Hampshire that is, I made up a town there because
Mm-hmm.
it was actually connected to the fantasy book that I wanted. It was going to be, I think Robert Jordan wrote a story called The Woods Out Back, where this person goes into the woods out back and they're here in our world and they end up in a different world. So anyway, I sort of got off track, but I originally wanted to do something like that. So I made up this town in New Hampshire, and and then I and then I used that town. That's where Sam's
Mm-hmm.
family is from. I did the same when she went out to Washington, but I made up this town that I thought was so perfect Brewster, Washington. I'm like, oh my God, this sounds just like a place in Washington.
It does
And
sound like a
was
place
a
in
place.
Washington.
It was a place in Washington. And I was like, oh no, because I had them up way up north, and actual Brewster is more southern. So I had to do a little I had to
Mhm.
do a little backtracking there. And so yeah, I absolutely make up places. But I also try to incorporate a lot of, like, again, the next book is in Seattle, never been to Seattle, trying to incorporate a lot of actual Seattle places without screwing it up too much.
Yeah. I like mixing fictional and real places, or at least like real regions.
Yeah.
So obviously all my sci-fi stuff is completely made up. There's nothing real in there, which is actually kind of why I like writing sci-fi, because no one can ever question you on anything.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
just be like, oh, well, it's fictional. Like you can't say anything about it. So I wrote one general fiction novel, which is actually my favorite thing of all the things that I've written. I think it's infinitely better than my sci-fi personally. But in that one, it's set in Alabama in a fictional town. So I describe kind of real world places that surround it, but the town itself is fictional.
Mhm.
And it makes it a little bit easier where you can draw on real world elements that people are familiar with. You could mention like Birmingham, Alabama is like X number of miles away. And then at the same time, you can have a fictional town where it's sort of, well, I was going to say it's sort of drawing on real things, but honestly, I've never been to Alabama.
I
can't,
have. I have.
I
It's,
can't really say that, but from the little research that I did do, I think it's fairly realistic. But I'm working on a horror novel right now, very slowly, that because I just have no time for anything anymore. And that one is set in Washington, D.C., which is where I moved from before I moved to Vegas last year. And I'm describing real world places and monuments and landmarks and all of that I know very, very well because I've seen them a million times. But then I made up some fictional things like you did with that biker bar that
mm,
maybe is set in a real town, but it's not an actual establishment. I made up a university that is set like on the opposite side of the Potomac, that is on the Virginia side,
mm,
that it's not real. Like that's a completely made up university, but everything around it I describe is a real thing. So I like doing that too. And I
yeah.
think that it can just, especially if you're writing in a genre, maybe not that novel that I'm talking about, but yours, where you have a fantasy theme, you have supernatural elements to it that are not really real world, but setting it in someplace that could be familiar to people, I think can really ground it. And
Yeah.
I think it can be really fun to do it that way. So for your novel, the two that you have out right now look like they're part of a series, or what will be a series.
Yes.
So okay, so the first one is Afflicted, and then the second one is Conflicted, which I
Yeah.
like the naming because it reminds me sort of like Divergent, and then
Yeah.
the ones that come after it that are similar sounding words. So the first thing I want to say before we actually go into talking about the subject of your novels and the plot and all of that is I really, really like that you have a recurring main character and actually put it into the title. So it's a Samantha Sinclair novel for
Oh,
both of
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot because it reminds me almost of like James Patterson having like Alex Cross is
Mhm.
a recurring character, where those novels of his, it'll say like it's like an Alex Cross sort of novel, or like the Jason Bourne novels, which it's not James Patterson, but having that character and people really knowing that is what the story is going to be about. I always think that's cool because I don't personally do that, and I think I maybe should. So tell me a little bit about, I guess let's start with, who is Samantha Sinclair?
Oh, okay. So, well, first off, I should say that the reason I did that is because my cover artist asked if I had a byline or something like that, and I didn't know what to do. But
Mm-hmm.
Patricia Briggs, she has the Mercy Thompson, and it says Mercy Thompson, and I thought that's a real simple way to, to let people know
Mm-hmm.
that that book is going to be about her. So Sam is, and I've had over the years I've become more comfortable talking about her, but she's clairvoyant.
Okay.
She only sees like the bad things that happen to people, rape, murder, stuff like that. And she's had it since she was 6 years old, which it's an affliction. That's how, which is
Mhm.
part of where the title comes from. Also, there are some other supernatural elements where people are afflicted with certain things.
Mhm.
So I don't know, she's a librarian in a community college because I wanted to work in a community college. I love libraries. So basically, she's doing things that I'm familiar with. And in order to make the visions and the marks on her body stop, because she'll come out of the visions with marks on her body from what's happening to the people.
Oh,
And I'm
that's
not
cool. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's very violent because, like I said, I like true crime, so I use some elements of true crime in this. So she comes out with marks on her body, has these horrible visions and nightmares, and it only stops if she helps to, um, I don't want to say helps the police because in the second book she's not really helping the police,
Mhm.
although she is helping a uniform. But if until the mystery stops being a mystery. And I know I'm sort of speaking around
Until
it.
she kind of like brings closure to
Yes.
that. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. As soon as she brings a closure to it, then those things stop. But
That's cool. And you know what's also cool to me is that I like that you're referring to these sorts of abilities as being afflicted, because
mm,
I think that a lot of the time when you have characters who are psychic or clairvoyant or have some sort of psychic ability like that, that a lot of the time it's presented as more of a gift. Like it's like, oh, like I have this spiritual gift and it's like a blessing and all of this. And look at the things that I'm able to do and the people I'm able to help with it. And I don't think that now, at least right now, people don't really look at those kinds of things as maybe, I don't want to say negative because I'm not saying that Samantha's story is negative, is necessarily negative with that she has these abilities, but people don't often present it in a way where it could show that that character may suffer in a
yeah.
sense from this, like especially if you're the kind of person who, like you said, Samantha's only seeing the bad stuff. So I would imagine that that is a lot, that's a big burden to carry. So I think calling it afflicted rather than blessed is a really good way of describing that. It's just that people always look at this in sort of a very rosy kind of way when we start talking about more new agey or more kind of psychic-y stuff like that. I don't really know what to call it, but it's always like I want to have these experiences. I want to do this. I want to see spirits. I want to commune with spirit. I want to do this or that. And it's like, well, I don't know. It can be scary. It can be a lot to
Yeah.
deal with. So
Yeah,
so
after
that's
reading
cool.
that, you won't want, well, and I read a while ago that if you have a person with some kind of supernatural ability, that there has to be a drawback to it. So
Hmm.
for people who write about magic, for instance, magic can be very draining on the body, or they have to sacrifice an animal, or
Hmm.
there has to be some balance. And for Sam, yeah, if for those who've read the book, they'll know that she has dealt with depression and a lot of other, mental health issues as a result of it. So,
Hmm.
because usually that kind of story doesn't really intrigue me.
Yeah.
So it had to be something kind of dark and
No, that's, I like that. And I agree with you that any sort of talent or ability always has sort of a catch to
mm,
it. I made a video once about just creativity in general, how a lot of the time it at least correlates with mental illness, and
yep,
that a lot of people who would consider themselves to be particularly creative people will also have some sort of comorbid mental disorder, no matter what it is. Like there's so many different kinds, but you don't usually get, you're not usually born with a talent or an ability that doesn't have maybe something negative that goes along with it. Like there's
yeah,
always a trade-off, I feel like. So when it comes to a psychic ability like that, at least in a fantasy novel, I like presenting it in a way that it's going to take a toll on the person. It's not all just like lovey-dovey happiness and all of this. So another thing that I think is really cool is having a true crime element to this, because that is so big right now. And I think that would appeal to a lot of people, especially since fantasy is also, I think, making a comeback. And Game of Thrones really did kind of get that to be mainstream again. And then someone I had interviewed had also said that, and I never really thought about this, that Twilight actually really brought fantasy into the mainstream again. And that, you know, you could say what you want about it and you can knock it if you want, but at the same time, I guess we have to give a little bit of credit to Stephanie Meyer that she was able to bring that genre back to like extremely wide scale appeal, whether you agree with that appeal or not for Twilight. So, you know, having both true crime and then fantasy, which is in now, I think are both things that are going to help you a lot when it comes to having readership and then people actually finding your novels interesting. So, so that's cool to me. So do you want to tell me and everyone a little bit about the actual storyline for at least Afflicted? Like let's get people hooked on the first one.
Okay. So in this there are a couple different storylines. One, and they're both actually true crime storylines, and I'm going to be somewhat vague because I don't want to give it all away.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But basically with Sam, she has to be close to the person, not in a relationship close to, but either physically close to, or you know, some kind of interaction with that person before she starts having the visions. So one night she's in a bar and she has some pretty horrific visions. She inserts herself into a situation, and as a result, she attracts a stalker. The other one is the larger part of the story, and which is why I love true crime, is a murder mystery. And so women in Connecticut are either going missing or being murdered brutally. And I had to do a lot of research on how to murder women in this very specific way, which is why I listen to a lot of true crime to make sure that, is this something that if someone had the ability to do it, would they do it? If they were psychopaths? And yes, people would, and much worse. So she comes in contact with a police detective because he is investigating the disappearance of one of her colleagues. And then she starts having visions about people that he knows. And he becomes very interested in how she knows what she knows. And then she ends up helping with this case, which is baffling people as to how women are ending up in the woods, how they're dying the way they're dying. It's very I guess one of the things with being an author is you try to challenge yourself, and I tried to challenge myself to write about things that really nauseate me. And I think I did okay with that. I think I did pretty good with that. So it is pretty graphic in that aspect. So yeah, that the big part is a murder mystery. The smaller story, and there is a love story in there too, but the smaller part of it is more of something that is happening to Sam, and then how is she going to deal with this?
Does she deal with the families of the victims, or is it a lot of just it's more investigating, I guess, and kind of dealing more with the law enforcement side of things?
She is dealing with law enforcement. She's dealing with she's dealing with Detective Cardoza, and him specifically, but also they put together a task force that they put together with the state police. So she does help them. She does not talk to the family specifically, except for Detective Cardoza and the person that he knows who is with this. And I can't say any more than that about families because that will give away too much.
Okay. The only reason I was asking is because I was thinking, like what you were just saying, that there are certain things that as the author on your side of things, it can be hard to write. And I have a hard time writing, and not because I get too emotional or anything, but more because it's just not something I'm really used to doing, is writing a scene that I think would be like hyper emotional. like having something where she's dealing with the people who just lost their loved one. Like I would personally have a very hard time with writing that, and not because I would be like weeping as I was writing it, but just because I feel like I wouldn't really know how to present that in an effective way. So that was the only reason that I asked. But yeah, there are definitely things where as the author, it can be tough to write because you're writing about a subject matter that disgusts you.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you're especially true crime, which is why I'm personally really conflicted when I listen to a true crime podcast or like watch something on Netflix, like a documentary, because I don't know, like I feel like you're listening to like horrific real world things, stuff that actually happened and that involves like human beings, like real people. And
Mhm.
sometimes I'm sort of like, am I deriving entertainment from the suffering of others? But at the same time, I'm like, I just can't get enough. Like it's like very like a very like morbid kind of curiosity that I think is sort of almost instinctual for a lot of people. And I think that it's just something that as humans we're fascinated by darker things, even if we are personally horrified and disgusted by them. So it can be
Yeah.
tough to write those things, like especially like in my novel, the general fiction one, Devils in Sunday Hats. This is gonna give stuff away, but there's I'm just gonna say it anyway. There's I don't actually depict it, but because that would have been too much for me. I can't do this, but I very strongly imply a sort of gang rape situation,
Mhm.
and which is disgusting. It is like one of the most like I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of rape it is, but that is like particularly horrific to me. And it's just that's not easy to write. So I totally avoided depicting it because I didn't feel it was necessary to actually show that. But I made it clear that that's what was going on, and that was tough. Even not depicting it directly was tough because
Yeah.
it's just something that you're just like, I'm writing this and I'm just thinking like, oh God, like this is coming out of my imagination. Is this like some part of me that I'm like is like deep down like really dark and gross, like that I'm not,
No, no.
like so it's tough. It can be tough.
It can be. And I'll tell you, so like I said it in the beginning, I taught women's studies for a long time, or for not a long time, like 5 or 6 years. And one of the things, so like two things. One, the podcast that I would listen to, My Favorite Murder, they would talk about these things, and they would also talk about how, so for instance, back in the 70s when sex workers were murdered, how the police did nothing because it was, the police were, had this belief that, well, they're in a dangerous
Hmm.
profession anyway, that sort of thing. So they talk about the real humans behind the murders. But I also think it's important to, like, me as a, like, I do not romanticize, because rape happens in my book as well. It's alluded to, like you
Hmm.
said, it's alluded to. I don't talk about it in detail. I don't think that's necessary, but also how Sam, like how it is dealt with in the book. But I do think it's important for me to talk about that stuff in my books because it's always on my mind.
Hmm.
And also that people need to be aware that this kind of stuff happens all the
Yeah.
time. And so very often almost nothing is done about it. So I do deal with that in a way
Hmm.
in both of my books, actually. And I'm not going to say how it's dealt with. I'm just going to say that it's dealt with, and it's not romanticized.
Yeah.
And that's all I can say. It's
Yeah, these are things that happen, as
Yeah,
horrific as they are. So I don't think that it's helpful to sugarcoat the
yeah,
world, because well, I'm not saying that people should look at the world as an awful place. There are definitely awful things in real life that, you know, you just need to kind of face it. And I think that drawing attention to it, especially like you just said, I can't say that I don't know if this is necessarily the case anymore, but that definitely was true and may still be true that when a sex worker is killed, people are going or were going to be likely to say, well, exactly what you just said, that they're in a dangerous line of work. They're sort of asking for it. Like this is maybe an inevitable end to them that they should have expected in some way, or at least like accepted the risk of that. And then it makes it easy to sort of dismiss the tragedy that actually just happened when you kind of look at it in a way where you're saying, well, this person knew the situation that they were putting themselves into, and like lo and behold, this is what happened. So a lot of the times this stuff does sort of get dismissed or swept under the rug or just ignored as like, it's like a form of victim blaming, I guess.
It is, oh,
That
it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you draw attention to these things, I think that it does a lot of good to actually depict this, because it's something that people might ignore or people might overlook, because that is sort of a marginalized group of people, I guess you could say, sort of living on the fringe of society in a way, because it's going against certain societal norms that we have. So then you end up looking at them like, not you and not me,
Yeah.
but like people may look at that as like they're less important in some way.
Totally.
So I respect that you actually tackle these kinds of issues when a lot of people, I think, would shy away from them as the author, just because of the fact that it can be so uncomfortable. So with the subject matter, and this is just out of my own curiosity, it doesn't doesn't matter either way, but do you, like, I know that people will put, I don't personally do this, but I know that people will put like trigger warnings or, like sort of a thing at the beginning that will let people know that it's going to be talking about certain issues that they might find difficult to read or deal with. So do you do that for yours? Like I don't do that in mine, but do you do that, or you kind of let the reader just get to it themselves?
So my first book, I didn't even realize that that was a thing, because I don't know if you've heard of JD Robb, but she writes the In Death series, and
Mm-mm.
it's a police series. And anyway, there is a lot of horrific stuff that happened to the main character as a child, and she doesn't have any kind of trigger warnings at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I just sort of skip over that and then just assume that that's what people do. If you come across a scene that you don't like, you just skip over it. So
Mm-hmm.
it didn't even dawn on me to do that with my first book. A few people who reviewed the book mentioned that she needs trigger warnings, and I did not do that in my second book. What I did do, and my third book is going to be a horror novel. So if you walk into a horror novel, horrible things are
Mm-hmm.
everything is on the table, right? But in
Yeah.
my second one, I did do a Dear Readers. And
Mm-hmm.
I did let them know that some of the characters in this book use torture as a way of entertainment. So just sort of warning without giving all the trigger warnings, because
Yeah.
books out there, they have like 4 and 5 pages of trigger warnings.
Mm-hmm.
I let people know it's incredibly
Yeah.
violent, and it's incredibly violent.
I think that's all you need to do. If you're going
Yeah.
to do anything like that, I think what you did is perfectly fine and sufficient for letting people know that this is the content that they're going to be reading. I have my own personal opinion on the kinds of lengthy trigger warnings that you were just mentioning. Because I'm not going to go into it, but I have my thoughts on that. But I think that what you did is perfectly fine for what you were writing, and I think that people probably do appreciate that. So I'm glad you mentioned your horror novel, by the way, because when I was on your website, saw that and I got super excited because I love that genre, and that is one I actually know something about. So I know that one's not out yet. It's going to be an upcoming one. So I don't know how far along you are in that process of writing it and editing it and getting it out there and getting it ready for publishing. But can you tell me a little bit about it, because I'd really like to know. I know it's called Born Dark, which I like
Yes.
that name. So tell me as little or as much as you want about that, because that's cool to me.
Okay. Okay. So I don't I told my editor I would have it to her by the end of summer. So I'm still working on it and obsessing, and I've now got a stomach ache, but it's not an apocalypse, and it's not, all I can say is it's I don't even know how to see. With Sam, I've been sort of skirting around that for a while, and with Born Dark, there is something that is, oh my gosh, how can I even say this? People are also dying in really horrible ways.
Mm-hmm.
And people are acting violent. People who normally wouldn't act violent are acting out in incredibly violent ways. And in fact, I did this post on my TikTok about, don't piss off an author, and this is what happens. And basically I have this scene where, so I can tell you this scene and that's it, but where there's this famous football player and his wife is an influencer, and she attacks him on screen, and it gets very, very violent. And I can't really say more than that because it's going to sound like one genre, but I'm
Hmm.
sort of mixing a couple different things together so that it does not become an all-out apocalypse. Because I will tell you that the Born Dark series is related to the Samantha Sinclair series.
Oh,
So
cool. Okay.
yeah, a character that's in the second book is going to be in Born Dark, but Born Dark is going to be horror, whereas that's urban fantasy.
I love that. It's like you are kind of expanding your universe
Mhm.
in a way,
Yeah.
and I feel like you are actually doing world building without realizing it.
Uh,
But it's cool to have kind of crossovers like that,
mm,
and that's very interesting to me because I had never really considered doing that before, but like hearing that, I actually that's not true. I did think about doing that once, where I was going to at least have just one of the main characters in Devils and Sunday Hats, my general fiction book. He's going to just be sort of in one scene as a student in class at that fictional university in the horror
oh,
novel I would like to write, and just mentioning him sort of in passing, just
yeah.
to have sort of like this is the Joey Durso universe, like this is these are the people that are in it, and they're kind of present in multiple places. So that's cool, especially since you're also sort of crossing genres with
Yeah.
it. So that's very interesting. I like that. So how far along I know you said that you were told your editor you would get it over to her. But like, do you have any idea of, and obviously this is hard to say, but do you have any sort of inkling as to when you might be getting that out there and available to readers?
I really would. I want to have it done. I want it done and out there before the end of the year, because the
Hmm.
other challenge I'm giving myself is to take less time writing books, because like the
Yeah.
first one took 15 years, the second one took 2 years. I'm kind of hoping this one takes less time than that. So I
Hmm.
would love to have it out before the end of the year. But I also know that my editor she is amazing, and she, like me, she's very picky, like in a good way, as an
Yeah.
editor,
Yeah.
right? Like,
She has a
so
good eye for these kinds of things, and
exactly. And she
yeah.
likes horror. So, because one of my biggest fears is, what if I don't scare people enough? What if
Hmm.
I gross them out, but I don't scare them, you know?
So
So I'm hoping it will be done and out and available before the end of the year. That's my hope. I would actually
mhm.
love it to be out by October 31st, but
That would be cool. One of your books, Conflicted, came out on Halloween. It
it
looks
did.
like,
Yeah.
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 No, that's I like that.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
fun timing of things. So I have some questions about. I know we were just talking about your horror novel, but the other ones are like murder mystery. I have
Mm.
some questions about that, largely for myself because I have been thinking. Um, you're the first person I've even said this to. So, this is kind of random. So I work in plastic surgery,
Oh,
and in almost all of my TikTok videos I put up, since I'm filming them right before I go into the office, I have scrubs on, and I always think like it's probably really weird for people that I have that like I'm everything about me physically in these videos has nothing to do with anything. Like I'm not in front of a bookshelf, I'm in my car wearing black scrubs, like ready to go in and then convince people to get Botox shot into their faces. So I was like, what would be kind of good to tie all this together? Maybe I should write, because I haven't really been writing that much lately. I've been focusing so much on like my blog and doing these videos and stuff. I'm like, maybe I should write a book or a novel that is plastic surgery themed. And I was thinking, like,
yeah.
I'm in Vegas now. This would be a great place to set that.
Mhm.
And I kind of would want it to be like a murder mystery. And I've never written in that before, ever. And I don't even really read a lot of that. I've read a little bit, but not enough that I can feel like I am super familiar with what is common in that genre, or like any sort of like tactics to write as an author. So do you have any advice for me? And I guess to anyone who is out there who is watching this, do you have any advice on how to kind of write a murder mystery effectively? Like, I feel like the thing that I'm imagining myself having trouble with is getting people to be invested enough in this. like where they're like, oh, I want to turn the next page and really find out what happened. So I know this is probably a hard question, because it's hard for me when people ask me like about writing process or anything where it's more instinct for me than it is something I can like really consciously describe.
Mm.
But if you're able to, do you have any tips for me?
Okay, so
I need some help with that.
all right. So I was a part of this group on Facebook, and I think it was called Cops and Writers, and it's police officers, ex-police officers that run this site. So anytime I would have questions about procedure, I would ask questions on there.
Oh, that's
But
great. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Hmm.
that's the first thing, because you definitely want to get the procedure right. But
Yeah.
since I, you know, in order to get it completely right, I felt like I would have to become a police officer, which I'm not going to do at this point in my life. Although I think I would be okay at it. But so what I did was the story is from Sam's perspective and how she interacts with the police.
Hmm.
So I certainly did the research on police procedure and what's realistic and what's not. And even in the second book, there's an FBI agent in the second book, and I had to really think about how I started the book. It was how I originally started it. It would not have, like, an FBI agent. Even my editor, who lives in England, was like, "Look, I'm not American, but even I know an FBI agent wouldn't do this," you know.
Hmm.
So really doing the research on procedures, on expectations, and then telling it from the perspective of the person that you're most comfortable telling it from. That's how
That's
I
a
did
good
it.
idea. That's the
Yeah.
thing I worry about, is that I wouldn't be able to, like, if I'm when I was thinking about this, I'm like, I should probably avoid having the cop be the main character, because I
Mm.
really think that, because I don't know very many people in law enforcement. Like my brother-in-law is, but like I don't know. Like he lives back in New York. Like I don't I don't have a lot of exposure to that sort of like career path. I don't really have a lot of stories that people have told me. So I feel like I would be writing it sort of just like, well, this is what I imagine it's like. So going out and doing some research is definitely helpful. But what you're saying, to write from the perspective that you know, is
Yeah.
definitely a good idea.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like I wouldn't necessarily be able to present it in a realistic way if I was having the law enforcement character be the point of view.
There is a homicide detective in my second book. So he's the one that was in the in the Dark Born Dark series.
Yeah.
And I
Hmm.
was going to tell, because I thought it would be really cool to tell some of what he sees from his perspective. And then I
Hmm.
thought, I don't think I can do that, because I don't know, other than putting on boots and gloves, I don't know the thought process that goes through a police officer's mind.
Hmm.
So then I thought, I don't know if I can do that, but I could certainly tell it from the perspective of the main character anyway. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I think like telling it from the perspective of the person you're most comfortable telling it from, that was
It's
key for
gonna, yeah, it's gonna make it, as the author, a lot easier for you, I
me.
think.
And
And
more
then, yeah, and
believable.
more believable. You definitely, anytime you're writing, this is definitely true of military stuff. My
Yeah.
fiance loses his mind when we're watching anything that is military themed, and there are blatant inaccuracies that I, as a civilian, would never catch. I like
Yeah.
to me, I'm like, all the uniforms look the same, and then he's like screaming about how that's an Air Force uniform when they're showing the Navy and stuff. So you definitely open yourself up to a lot of criticism if you present things like that, which are, people in law enforcement. That's a profession and a calling that they can really dedicate themselves to, and I think that they take very seriously.
Mm.
So when you sort of trivialize it in a way and just make it into like, oh well, this is entertainment, it doesn't necessarily matter if this is accurate. Those kinds of people, whether it's like law enforcement, military, anything that is going to be inaccurate like that, can kind of upset people, or at least irritate them a little bit.
Sure, and
So
it takes you out of the story too. If
mhm.
you and that's the other thing that I've done is there are videos on YouTube of like military guys looking at. I was in the military too, so like, but it was a
Oh,
long
okay.
Yeah, it was a
Mhm.
and I thought about having one of my characters having served, and then I thought, well, I don't anyway. But I've watched videos of police officers, doctors, and other professionals watch like bits of TV shows in their profession and rate them. And so then I will gravitate towards those police shows or
Mhm.
whatever, hoping to get some insight
Yeah.
that would be helpful. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Makes sense. So,
yep.
we're a little low on time now, so I'm gonna kind of wrap things up. And this was cool though. I like talking about like genres or subgenres that I'm not super familiar with. And I want to thank you personally for giving me some tips because I've been thinking about it a lot, like writing that. And I'm like, oh God, I just feel like there's certain things that I'm just not going to be able to do right. So thank you for giving me a little bit of insight into that because maybe if I ever write this one day, I'm going to be like, it was Heather. But yeah, so I'm going to direct everyone over to your books. I'm going to put links in the description for all of them. So right now, if you are interested in reading dark urban fantasy and also sort of like murder mystery, then you've got two novels here that you can get started with. We've got Afflicted, a Samantha Sinclair novel, and then the sequel Conflicted, which is also about Samantha Sinclair. So I'll put the links in the description. I know you can find those on Amazon and then probably some other places too, I would think. But I'll put the Amazon links below. And then definitely everyone who's watching, if you are a horror fan, please keep an eye out for Born Dark, which is going to be another series that Heather is writing. So when that comes out, then I would actually love to have you back on here to talk a little bit more about that because this was really interesting for me. So after that's out, I would love to have you back, and
I
then
would
we
love
can,
to. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we could talk about that a little bit. So yeah, go check out those books. I'll put a link to everything in the description, and then thank you so much, Heather, for being here. I really, really appreciate it,
Thank you
and
for having
I
me.
learned some things that I think are really going to help me, and hopefully the people watching it'll help them too.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. So everyone stay tuned for next week's episode and make sure to subscribe so we can keep supporting more indie authors out there. And so until next time, thanks so much for your support, everyone, and God bless you all.